It is a space to speak your mind. I'm joined by James Lindsay, who's the author of Befriending My Brain, a psychosis story. So thank you for being here, James.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it's time to talk day, and we're talking about psychosis today. So, from your own lived experience, can you explain what that is and how it's affected you?
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, it's a condition where your reality or your perception of your reality is completely different from those around you. So like what's going on inside your head is kind of like separate from what people can see and interpret like externally. And yeah, for me, the first time I had it was after a breakup. Um so I was living with an ex-partner and moved to live with my family. And then that breakup kind of caused me to have like sleepless nights, like consecutive sleepless nights, which was really bad for me because and my kind of like reaction to it wasn't good either. I was kind of like trying to just carry on as normal and sort of ignore the warning signs and the lack of sleep, and then experience like delusions and hallucinations, and was eventually sectioned for 4 weeks under the Mental Health Act. So I had to live in a ward and recover, like start to recover there. So it was very traumatic, but like necessary to start getting better.
Yeah, it must have been a very frightening experience. I mean, is this the first time you've had these symptoms, or is there anything from earlier on that you can kind of connect to it, maybe?
It's interesting because like with the kind of life experience and wisdom I've got now, and I kind of look back at my early 20s before I had psychosis, there was probably a couple of times where I was kind of not getting a lot of sleep and maybe acting a bit more hyper and out of character. But at the time, I kind of didn't see it as like kind of early warning psychosis. So it was just a kind of a bit of a like a blip. And then fortunately I was able to kind of regain sleep and then think nothing of it. But now I kind of think, well, I was a little bit close there to having a more serious mental illness episode. And luckily it didn't happen back then, but it happened eventually.
You talked about some of the symptoms there, and I've just read some of what you've talked about in the past, and you've mentioned that even at the time, the symptoms might not have been recognizable to you, the things like speaking too fast or maybe a bit of confusion. So, was that something other people noticed before yourself?
Yeah, luckily I'm very fortunate that I had a good support network at the time. So like moving back in with my family, like my mum and dad and brother were able to kind of realize that I was acting strangely. And it was their suggestion for me to like kind of go to the GP and get help, which was just as well because even though me back then, I was kind of dismissing it all and saying I was okay when I wasn't. So I was really lucky to kind of have that support network to get me the help I needed.
It's interesting as well because it does affect your memory. So the experiences that you have when you sort of look back, even in the near future afterwards, you don't seem to recall the same sort of things that maybe other people around you are seeing.
Yeah, so it's like it's a funny one because it's a very patchy time in my life in terms of memory. And I think because I was so sleep deprived, that was like one of the reasons, because the brain wasn't like, repairing itself like it usually would. So there's bits I can remember, but there's also I've had conversations with friends and family, and they said to me, "Oh, you said this or you did this," and I was like, "Did I?" Like really surprised. Like really, the only thing I can compare it to is like maybe when I was really young and like having alcohol and not forgetting stuff I did the night before, but that was more of a kind of, you know, comical type thing. Whereas this was really serious. I was like sober but really ill and not remembering things that like, so that's kind of really alarming when you find out that way.
And tell me about the treatment you had. So did you have medication at first?
Yeah, so when I was living on the ward, I think I was on about 3 or 4 different medications, and it was a combination of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, which had like unpleasant side effects, but they were like completely necessary because they helped me to start finally getting sleep, and then the sleep helps your brain recover. And yeah, the mood stabilizers kind of help you kind of, I guess, behave more sensibly and not so erratic. So yeah, it wasn't nice at first having medication, but like it needed to be done, like because you need that intervention. And like with psychosis, I've since like learned that the earlier the intervention, the kind of stronger the recovery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And interesting as well from your book that you talk about medication. And I think this is so true for a lot of conditions, is that might not automatically be put on the right medication. And it's sometimes for, through that process for us to maybe recognize that and to talk about what the symptoms are that we're getting from the medication so that we're put onto the right one eventually.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't good at first at articulating about how the initial medication I was on wasn't working for me. And I wish I'd kind of been more honest, like sooner to the doctors and people like that. And also, I was very, at one point, kind of anti-medication, like kind of determined that I wanted to overcome it myself. And now I'm like much more pro-medication and I still take it now. And I really like being on it now because I know I can take it and then I'll have a good night's sleep and I'll stay mentally well. Whereas if I stop taking it, like I'm more likely to have another relapse.
Mm. And you talk about sleep a lot. I mean, that is such a cornerstone of our well-being, and sometimes we don't take it for, or we do take it for granted, don't we? Having the right amount of sleep can affect our whole well-being.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think like I definitely took it for granted like growing up, and then I think being at university and like being used to not sleeping a lot, kind of being on nights out and kind of being able to function on a little sleep, and I kind of got used to it. And then kind of mid-20s realized, sort of learned the hard way how important sleep is. And yeah, without it I'll just be in a lot of trouble basically.
And you offer cognitive behavior therapy at CBT. So people may have heard of this before, but don't quite know exactly what it is or how it helps. Can you explain a little bit about how that was for you?
Yeah, so I think I had about 8 to 10 sessions, and like I had one session a week. It was through the NHS, and I felt lucky that the person I got matched up with, the person who was delivering the sessions, was like really good with me, like a really good fit. And she was able to kind of make me realize like how I was viewing my own opinion of myself was quite low. And so there was like a sort of self-esteem thing there. And also that my way of dealing with stress was kind of like not a long-term benefit. Like I was just sort of avoiding all stress rather than kind of embracing it a little bit and then kind of being more resilient and being able to deal with it. Um, and yeah, there was just a lot of like things we unpacked that kind of needed resolving, and I'd get like kind of weekly, like not kind of like homework, but kind of like something like a worksheet to kind of think about like before the next session. And there was just loads of like practical tools and steps that she kind of introduced me to that um made me realize kind of how to take care of myself better and to have like more empathy and more self-compassion. So yeah, again, I'm a really big advocate for that type of therapy. I think it could like benefit anyone.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because I think self compassion is so important. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves that self care, and again, it's one of the cornerstones of mental well being to recognize how we are, but also have that self care and not treat ourselves badly when we are going through these bad times.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I used to be terrible. Like I was so hard on myself, and I'm not sure where it came from, but I was just so sort of negative. And like if I did something which was like kind of good and positive, I'd sort of almost like dismiss it. Like I should be doing that anyway, or I should be, doing better. But after CBT, I was very much kind of thinking about all the little things that I did positive that day and actually reframing it and kind of congratulating myself and just give myself like that positive reinforcement. And it's like a snowball effect. Once you start kind of thinking that way, it kind of starts doing wonders for your well-being, like more than you realize.
You've talked about schizoaffective disorder. Can you explain the difference there and the nuances?
Yeah, so that's my current diagnosis and condition. So it sits on the spectrum with so schizophrenia is on one end of it and then bipolar is on the other end. And it sits somewhere in the middle because it shares symptoms with both of those. So it's both like a mood disorder and a psychotic disorder, if that makes sense. So I think I'm more towards the schizophrenia end of it because at the moment I take an antipsychotic, but I don't take mood stabilizers. But I am very kind of try and be very self-aware of like my moods. So if something kind of happens to me on a day and I kind of react to it, I kind of have to step back and kind of almost like tell myself that like not to take it too personally. Um, so it's sort of a condition that I manage and I live with kind of fairly what's the words like I'm quite stable, but it's because of the medication. It's sort of like preventing me from having like further psychotic episodes where like I would lapse back into that kind of psychosis if I didn't take the medication, if that makes sense.
Mm. And just through your own investigation, and I know you do look into these things quite a lot, have you discovered possible causes for that particular diagnosis and also what the treatments are?
I think there's like multiple things. So I think some people think it's like there's a genetic part of it, like you're more likely to have it if your parents have had it. Um, but that's not the case with me because both my parents that haven't had mental illness conditions. And I think it's to do with like life events, so like trauma, that can make it more likely. And also I think some people say about how it can be higher in different kind of ethnic communities as well.
And the treatment side of things, does that differ at all, or is it still the same sort of process?
I think the treatment is different for everyone. Like I think I know people who also take the same medication as me and it works for them, but also I've had chats with others who have taken my medication and said, oh, I didn't get along with that. Like I had a bad reaction to it. Because everyone's got different brain chemistry. And similarly, like with the therapy, like I personally found it really helpful, but I guess everyone's got a different experience of it. And I always say kind of like if you had a bad experience with medication or therapy to not think of it that it will always be like that. Because like before I got ill with my ex, we had like couples counseling and I had like a bad experience of that. And like that almost made me a bit anti-therapy as a result. But then I had good CBT. So now I've realized that it's kind of like it depends on who you're matched up with. And it also, I don't know, depends on where you are in your life. So there's so many kind of factors that go into it.
And today we're recognizing Time to Talk Day, a really important time to talk. And I know you're very passionate about in employment, having those open conversations. So, what would your advice be for those that maybe are going through difficult times, and also for employers as well, as far as what the employers can do to make the situation easier for those of us that are working?
Yeah, personally, one thing that I'm gonna make sure I do is because I'm in quite a few different group chats, like both on WhatsApp and like Teams at work and stuff, like both work colleagues and also friends. And I try and make an effort to sort of message people directly rather than just in the chat and just have that sort of check in and sort of catch up with them that way. And then it's like more personal. And you never know what the conversation could turn into. It could be really helpful for you or them. And I guess from a work point of view, it's kind of important to check in. Like I had a chat with my manager recently who kind of like asked if just checking I was doing fine just because apparently I'd been quiet recently, like at work. And I it was funny because I didn't even realize that I was displaying that kind of behavior that I might be seen as being quiet. And I was just saying, oh, on this occasion, like I'm okay, and I think I must have just been really like focused that day on what I was doing. But I really appreciated the actual, manager going out of their way to check in and make sure you're doing all right. So yeah, I just think it's important to start those conversations, like not just for Time to Talk Day, but all year round.
Yeah. I think for organizations that do recognize mental health of their employees, it's really good. But, there are some organizations and some businesses that historically might not do that. So, really, I think it's for everyone to have that conversation, isn't it, really? Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about what you might have recognized as far as red flags in the past. And, hindsight is a great thing. But for someone, again, that may be going through a difficult time at the moment? Are there things that you wish you'd known at the time?
Yeah, there's like lots of different answers to that. Because like when I had my first psychotic episode, I wasn't aware of all the different organizations out there who offer support. I thought it was just kind of NHS and that's it really. But um like the charity I work for now, like who are a mental health charity, I wasn't even aware they existed when I got ill, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of organizations out there, both like, corporations and charities who are doing like amazing things. Um, so I'd say kind of see what's out there that could help you. And definitely kind of don't try and go through it alone because from experience, I've tried that and it doesn't it's the hardest way of dealing with it. So definitely use the help.
Yeah, I mean, just having that first conversation sometimes it's just enough to take that pressure down just slightly, so that if we are going through a crisis situation, having a conversation can work wonders, really.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, my mum and dad always said to me when I was a kid that a problem shared is a problem halved, and I had that kind of growing up. Like, I feel lucky that I had that because it made me realize how important it is not to bottle things up, and like I still kind of have that to me, like to this day. And I'm sure like I don't have kids yet, but when I do, like I'll be making sure they realize that problem shares, problem halves.
And you've got some what we might term coping mechanisms now, or you've got things in your tool bag that you use. So, and I think some of them are centered around, as we talked about on the show before, the 5 ways to well-being. So, can you explain a few of the things that you do in your daily life that help you to have good mental health now?
Yeah, so as well as like making sure I take my medication, I just make sure I exercise enough because for me that's a really good release of stress. I make sure I eat fairly well as I can. I try and moderate, like if I'm drinking alcohol, try and moderate that because that can kind of make things worse. I'm doing dry Jan at the moment, but I'm kind of thinking it's quite nice, like to not have to deal with the sort of effects of alcohol, and I might be extending dry Jan because it's kind of re made me realize how much difference it makes to your overall well-being, like to kind of avoid it. So yeah, it's like it's never one thing, it's like a kind of combination of things, isn't it? Like kind of food, exercise, like health, everything really.
I agree with you. I think it's good to have all these things in your tool bag, and then you don't have to do it all of them all the time. But just if things are a little bit difficult, you can try one, try the other, maybe do a combination, ease back on certain things. It's not all about giving everything up or doing everything all at once, but just finding what works for you.
Yeah.
Also, talking to other people. I know for you, writing is such a big thing. You've got your book out. You do blogs as well. I mean, that's such a powerful thing, isn't it? To have a creative outlet and to be able to talk and help others along the way.
Yeah, massively. I still try and write these days, like I might write a poem or write like a diary journal thing about my day. And I feel like it's a good release if you're stressed. It's almost like when you write it down and you read it back, it's like it's emptied out of your head and it's on the paper, and you can kind of deal with it better that way. And yeah, I know writing the book and the blogs has been really good for me. Like I find it very therapeutic, sorry, process. And it's opened up good chats with people about their own mental health. And some of it was like quite surprising because I'd know them as a person and, think from the outside, like looking at their social media, they seem like they're doing great, and then they kind of confide in you and you realize that how common these things are. So yeah, it's just so important.
And if people want to know more about you, especially about your book, can you tell us where they can find those details?
Yeah, thank you. So it's called Befriending My Brain, a Psychosis Story, as you said, and it's available most places you can get books like Amazon, Waterstone's website. It's available in the different formats as well, which I'm pleased with. So it's paperback, but also ebook, Kindle, and recorded the audiobook last year as well, and that's on Audible. So it's good to get that version out there too. And yeah, I'm on all the socials like James Lindsay _23. So I'd like to post like kind of blogs and any stuff I do on there.
So people can find your book if they look at the notes for the podcast right now, if you're listening to the radio show, or just have a look in the notes of the podcast for the Time to Talk show for 2024. But for now, James Lindsay, author of Befriending My Brain, a Psychosis Story, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, and also thanks for being a host on like a really important podcast. I'm sure it's helping so many people. So doing amazing work. Thanks a lot.